Welcome, everyone. It's been a while. Ro and I caught up with each other last February, and I asked him, could you come out and do this book here in Loudoun County? That's a hard for an easy person. But before I get to the author's background, I'd like to thank and recognize the people who helped us put this together. So thank you. Where did Lori go? Did she disappear? Okay. Anna. Okay. Oh, I see. Thank you to the director of the library. Thank you to Anna, who is the librarian for genealogy. The Black History Committee I'm a member of, and we are partnering with the library. It's the Black History Friends of the Balch Library. If you are here, members, I know I'd like you to stand. And Donna is the chair. She has this sunglasses. And, we're partnering with the library on this. Also, we received approval from the Loudoun, Virginia 250. That's the local committee that is planning events for the 250th anniversary of the United States. So they have approved this program, and it is also located on our event card. We also have Derek Clark. Thank you, Derek, where you are. He did a lot of the outreach to help with getting additional people here in addition to the library. He also did outreach. And also, Derek is a fraternity brother for Ro over here. You'll notice. And I want to thank all of you for coming out, because this is our first event between the library and the Black History Committee to introduce African Americans who lived during the colonial period. We very rarely hear about that. We hear about civil rights, we hear about, but nobody goes back to the 1600s. So we're going back to the 1600s with the Quander family. And with that, I'd like to introduce our author, Ro Quander. I'm sorry, Ro, I'm using your nickname. That's kind of in my head. He's an author of several books, many in the back, a multi-generational Washingtonian, and an internationally renowned family, the Quander family, whose American lineage traces back 350 years in the Maryland and Virginia colonies. The family's history includes involuntary servitude to George Washington at his Mount Vernon plantation.
That's a nice word for slavery.
I know. I was writing it, I got it. Mr. Quando took a deep dive, very deep dive, into his family history and genealogy to take us from the colonial period to today. I'm reading the book, and the legacy of Henry Quando's family could be a mini series. This is his book, very easy to read. Mr. Quander earned his bachelor's degree and JD at Howard University, and that's where both of us are on.
You know.
He's now a retired senior administrative law judge for the District of Columbia. He's a licensed tour guide with a focus on outreach to students and adults, and his tour guide name is Mr. Q. He's authored 3 other books on his family. He is a guest lecturer and researcher on African American history and cultural topics. He has many activities, could go off the side of this page, but his most recent, he's a most recent member, which interests me also, of the African American Advisory Council, State of Virginia, for the 250th anniversary of the founding of the United States, 1776 to 2026. I'll close with his pride. He's married to Carmen. Where's Carmen? Okay, she's a little over there. Okay, and his son, namesake son in the back. Carmen is a well-known professional artist. Her area is considered representational art, for which she created the cover of the book. Also in the back, you will see a portrait of the retired judge. They have 3 adult children and 1 grandchild. Let us welcome our author of the Quanders.
Good afternoon. That's such a lovely introduction. I have to live up to that. Try to be a little informal. Delighted to be here with you this afternoon. Thank you so very much. And when she mentioned, I was going to mention, she mentioned about the 250 Council. What it is, every state in the Union has a 250th Commission for the nation. And inside of those 250 commissions for each state, they subdivide if they want to. And so the state of Virginia has others that are looking to make sure they don't leave anybody else. We have an African American Council, a Women's Council, a Latino Council, etc. And so I am on the African American Council. It's not, I wasn't appointed by the governor of the committee itself, because to be on the commission, you have to be a resident of the state in question. So I live in the district. But this is the type of work we're doing to make sure that events similar to this are being told. There are many stories that need to be told about what people of women, Latinos, Native Americans, African Americans have done. And much of that, we want to make sure that we don't miss anybody, because we only do that part only once every 250 years, okay? So in that case, we don't want anybody to be left out. First of all, I am Rohulamin, that's how it's pronounced, Rohulamin Quander. And I, like so many of us, that represents mixed heritage and race. And my mother's side is from Calcutta, India. That's why I have the name Rohulamin from. And my son in the back has the same name. And my daughters are Fatima, which is Christian, Islamic also. And my other daughter is Ilyana, okay. And that's my wife is Carmen, okay. I am going to talk informally because I want you to know something about who we are, not just colonial, but more importantly, continuity from colonial up to the present time, and get some idea where we are now, where we're going, what we're going to do with it. How we are dedicating ourselves, hopefully, in life, each and every one of us here in the room, responsibility, manhood, womanhood, perseverance, manhood, scholarship, perseverance, and be sure wherever you go, take somebody with you. Okay, all right. So we uplift. That's what we're focused on. So I'm just going to talk in casually, and in the process, I will make some proper reference to all 4 of my books. But today, under the particular invitation that relates to the Quanders since 1684 and enduring African American legacy. But we've also discovered since then a document that goes back to the 60s and 70s, but it doesn't have details, it has a list. So we use 1684 because that is when a certain will was written that particularly referenced the future freedom, which came in 1686. So I introduce you to the Quando story and preserving an American legacy. Notice we say an American legacy, because what I'm talking about is not African American history, it's American history. That's exactly it. So we want to make sure you understand that when we talk about the Quando, we talk about American history, but maybe from a little more African American perspective. So that is why I'm here. And these folks you see in the shadows are all Quander relatives, whether they be from Washington, or Maryland, or Virginia, or some other place, Ghana, West Africa included. So the story begins from the literal written point in 1684, when a man named Henry Adams, the colonial legislator who migrated to the New World from England in 1639, settled himself in Maryland as an indentured servant, if you know what that is. He was, so to speak, a slave for a couple of years. And after he got his period of 7 years, he should have got his freedom, but he didn't have to sue for it. But he was successful. A white man could go to court and sue for his freedom. He got it. So he lived later. This is later on. Older man. I don't know if he was still anything else, but he wrote a will in 1684. And in that will, he provided for the eventual freedom of 2 of his 4 enslaved. He didn't mention the other 2 by name. He just made a reference to those 2. And he provided for the eventual freedom. Come on in, come on down. Thank you. But for the eventual freedom of the other 2 by name, Henry Quando, D.O., and a woman, Margrett Pugg, P-U-G-G. And this is in 1684. He died in 1686, and they got their freedom at that particular time. But of course, freedom didn't mean anything like freedom does today. We were colonies, we didn't have any constitutions, and Black people were presumptively enslaved. And just because one had freedom papers did not mean that you were free, and free. Okay. So after not too long a time, Henry and Margrett were married. And I say married, I don't know what the relationship, we haven't found the marriage record, so we'll presume at least a common law relationship. And they were farming. They were farming in Charles County, across the river in Maryland. And in 1695, there was a deed from I forgot Mr. Wheeler's first name, it's right there in my head, Ignatius Wheeler, a deed to Henry Quando for 99 years, and they came into that particular piece of land that was farming land. If you're familiar, if you've ever heard of Wheeler Road in Prince George's County, this is the same family, the Wheeler family, Wheeler Road, Prince George's County. And they began to farm that land, and there's a reference in the will about Mr. Quando Henry Quando getting certain property in the will of Henry Adams when he died. So presumably he may have had some of the same property at that time. Do you think I need a microphone? Yeah. Yes or no? Yeah. Yes, okay, gladly.
Sorry, we didn't ask you.
No problem, we'll hold on for a second. And I realize we're recording this, it makes it better too. The audience is listening, we have a microphone to capture it.
Sorry to interrupt.
No problem. Okay. I'm wired. From Russia with Lev, you know what I'm talking about. Rachel. Okay, all right. I don't, can you hear that a little differently? Barely differently.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, you might want to. There you go. There you go.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe this will even be better still. Okay. So, as I was saying, the provision in the will, they probably have some of the same property, not sure. But the question, of course, is how to spell the name. Well, it's an interesting story. Various spellings of the Quander surname. In Ghana, West Africa, we found out over time, it's apparently a Fati name. And in Ghana, the name Quando, language wasn't necessarily written until the 19th century. So the QU of Anglo is KW in Akka. So in Akan, we find the people there ancestrally, the Quandos, the Quandos, Quandos, Quando, all of these are variations of the same name that came into Ghana from Abyssinian highlands, traced back as far as I believe the 9th century. So when it shows up here, we believe when the forebear was asked his name, they didn't understand Quando in Anglo, Quando, I'm Quando. So it stayed Quando, and then the census taken of 1800, the O fell away, and it became ER, and in some places ERS. But that O is going to show up again later. I talk about it. Okay. So the very storied history of the family occurs on both sides of the river. In some cases, it's in Maryland. In other cases, it's in Virginia. Needless to say, Washington hadn't been the federal city, as it was called, hadn't been created yet. So here we find a case where Henry Quando, who was a grandson, because now we're in the 1840s, 1740s, suing because he had built a house, one-room house nonetheless, and he had some other instruments that he owned, such as, based on it, it shows he was a shop owner as well as a carpenter. And the people didn't want to pay, so he sued them. And the court ruled in his favor. And the thing about it was so interesting to understand is that the chairman or the foreman of the jury was John Hanson. And if those of you know anything about John Hanson Highway, which is also Route 50 on the Maryland side, he was the first president of the United States. I bet you thought it was George Washington. Under the Articles of Confederation of Congress assembled, John Hanson was the first president of the United States, 1781, 1781. So I think later he became president because the case was 1741, but he became president in 1781. So you see, we're traveling in the right part of town. Okay. Under the will of General George Washington, or as I said, General, we didn't use the term president so much at that early time. Under the will of General Washington, he provided for the emancipation of his enslaved. Now, that's a very touchy subject, as we know well. George Washington had over 500 enslaved in his lifetime. And on the date of his death, December 14, 1799, he had 317 under his control. And of those 317, 123 were quote his, and the others were between rented and marked Washington's. So he provided for the eventual freedom, but he postponed the freedom until Martha's death, allegedly, because he didn't want to break up families. I don't know if that's true or not. It sounds good, doesn't it? I always say it would be better if he just freed him outright. And but let's not take away from him. He's a father of our country, a great man. He could have been a great turn man. And when you're comparing, and I realize I'm on Shake Brown here, I'm from Virginia, it's Thomas Jefferson's state. Thomas Jefferson had over 600. And you know what? You know when he freed? That's done, yeah, about 2. And Sally Hemings, his, he didn't free her. Some of you may not even know that. He had her for 38 years, and they say they had at least 6 pregnancies, I think, or some miscarriage. And didn't even free her. So let's look at the difference. George Washington, the greatness that he was, and I'm a consultant in Mount Vernon, so I have to be careful what I say. Because if they won't consult, they will insult rather than consult. So his will, he provided for the freedom of his. And when Martha did us a favor and passed away, nobody killed her, even though she was concerned about it because it's old and right. When she passed away, she was going to, under his will, so they would be free. But she decided, because she was deathly afraid that she'd fall down 10 flights of steps, that she decided to free them. And so January 1st, 1801, 2 weeks before, which was in 1800, she said on the 1st of January, you all can leave. So January 1st, 1801, everybody was gone. And then from that point, we begin to measure what became freedom from that sense. But a misconception that a lot of people have is that she freed them. No, she didn't. They were her dower. she released them back to the Custis family. So she couldn't free them because they weren't hers to free. Okay. So in that context, Mount Vernon has had a number of exhibits, and only in more recent decades have they been willing to more openly, not completely, but more openly talk about the institution of enslavement but how that played out in the context of George Washington. And they had an exhibit, some of you may have seen it, Lives Bound Together, Slavery, George Washington's Mount Vernon. That exhibit is going, the new one is coming, we're working on that now. And this is the opening, maybe not opening day, but the opening of that exhibit that was intended to be there for 2 years, ended up there for 4. And that's a shadow holograph of Nancy Quander, Nancy Quander, who was one of those enslaved women. And we talk about her in more detail. And with the new exhibit coming, we don't have a name for it yet, looking at all phases of George Washington's life from birth to death, and even beyond to the current generations. Because we have an organization called the League of the Descendants of the Mount Vernon Enslaved. And the purpose of it, logically, is to underscore the contributions of the men, women, children who ran the plantation. So George Washington could be Washington, go off to cross the Delaware River on Christmas night in an old crowded boat, while the slave kept the home fires burning, planted the crops, pulled up the weeds, harvested, ran the distilleries, ran the fisheries, did everything, put all the fence posts in, etc. And the legacy of Quanders and others who have descended, who have continued to work there only for compensation since, and still ongoing, okay? Now, when I talked about Maryland, I talked about Virginia, I also talked about the name Quando somehow keeps popping up, even though it's later. We're in 1830, and we are in Prince George's County, Maryland. And Miss Claggett, you may know the name Claggett, particularly on the Maryland side, but still known on this side. Miss Claggett had a will, and then she provided that one of her enslaved would work for such and such a period of time. And in this case, it was Negro Harry, should work for a year. And the proceeds were divided. He could have half, and the other half went to somebody else. But she didn't use the word free. So the question was, well, did she intend for him to be free? What other recitation might there be? And this was in 1823, she died. So Mr. Harry Quander waited, and then he waited. I'm not gonna say it 7 times, but all the way up to 1830, finally went to court. So the whole thing about people suing for their freedom in court was not unknown, but very difficult to prove. In this particular case, he was successful. And one reason why this case is so very important, at least to the Quando family history and legacy, is some of the players. Besides Negro Harry Quander, well, who else was in there? Well, his counsel was Francis Scott Key. Yeah, Mr. Key. And Mr. Francis Scott Key happened to have been the brother-in-law of Roger Taney. Dred Scott decision. Of course, he wasn't the Chief Justice yet, but they were brothers. That was his brother-in-law. Yeah. So here we have a case where this case is being decided, and Judge Cranch, who was the judge, was President John Adams' nephew and John Quincy Adams' first cousin. So what I said earlier about traveling in high cotton is an example of it. But of course, we didn't know all that. We're looking at records of that later. That did hold water that much at that particular time, but he got his freedom. So it did happen occasionally. And of course, if you know some of these questions of freedom by Dr. Thomas, William or Walt, I forget his first name, it highlights some of these types of cases, okay? So in Virginia, we had the registration of free Negroes, and we had 3 sets of the volumes. And it was important in Maryland, Virginia, and also in other places where one was free, to register your papers so that if you say you were free, where is it recorded? So that would be recorded in the courthouse, because if you had freedom papers and you're walking with them in your pocket and somebody assaults you along the road, takes your freedom papers, where are you? You know where you're gonna be, back in enslavement. 12 years a slave is a classical example of what happened. So if they snatch your papers, at least it's on at the courthouse that you indeed were free. Now that's an insult to have to register your freedom at the time. But retrospectively, it was a blessing because of later generations, our generation included, it helps our history to understand that so-and-so, whoever he, she, or they were free. And these papers tell us maybe how old they were, what color they were, if they had a mark, a scarf, if they were suffering from pock mark by reason of having had some pox, smallpox or something of that nature. And in our particular case, some of them will make a reference to previously in servitude to General Washington, which is George Washington, in some cases, not all. So we have the registration of free Negroes. So this is buttressing us. I just talked about on the Maryland side of the river. Now we're here on the Virginia side of the river. And in this particular case, the United States has already been created. So we do have Washington, D.C. So these types of registrations also existed in D.C. and in Maryland, okay? Now, we've got Quander Road, you probably heard of it in Fairfax County. And I don't have a slide because this presentation was made before that posted. But there are 4 Quander streets. I don't know if you know that. We've got Quander Road, which is right here in Fairfax County on Route 1. We have in DC, Quander Street, which was really the first one, put it about 1880. And it disappeared during World War II because they expanded the Navy Yard. So when they were taking those buildings down in the early part of the 21st century, the family and others petitioned to restore our name. So Quander Street's been restored back. You come out of the baseball stadium, you'll get to the metro. You got 2 entrances. If you go to the right, you can't miss Quander Street, you have to walk right past it. Then we have Quander's Promise, which is in Prince George's Bowie. And then we have Quander Lane, which is right here in Prince William County. Okay, all right. Now, can't see that, I'm sorry, it's not very clear, but this man is Charles Henry Quander. He is the one for whom the name Quander Road, if you know it, is his name. Born in 1843, allegedly in Maryland, we don't know the record. Taken over to Virginia as a baby, grew up on the Hayfield Plantation, Hayfield High School, on that property. And then when freedom came, they didn't tell him. So he worked, you know, a kind of isolation for at least a couple more years, and he found out, I'm free. Nobody told me. Well, goodbye. Oh, we're sorry. And they gave him money. And he said, well, thank you. And he left anyway. And he went over to what is now Quando Road to begin to buy land. And at the time of his death, it accumulated 88 acres of land. And on that land, of course, you may know West Potomac Park High School, heard of it. It's on that land, and Quando Road School's on that land also. And that land, he didn't get it from George Mason VI, but that land belonged to George Mason VI, who was descendant from George Mason. So that's Quander Road in Fairfax. Now, the Quander family reunion started in 1926, and we're getting ready for 1926. 2025 will complete our 100 years of continuous Quander family reunion. So now we're working on it, we're planning on it now. We just had the last month. We had the 99th. So this is a 1938 picture of 4 of the 1926 founders. And this gentleman here, Tom Quander, worked as a landscape gardener and occasionally a tomb guard for George Washington in Mount Vernon. And this lady is his sister, Susanna, brother's sister, and this is 2 of their nieces. And they are part of the legacy of what created Quander family reunion in 1926. Question.
Brother Quander, all of these old photos across the nation, they tend to not smile like this. Everyone's always serious. You know,
why are those people looking so mean? They didn't do this, though, you know.
yeah.
So, as far as we know, I'm not going to say for sure. As far as we know, only the Quanders and the Syphaxes have had Black family reunions here at Mount Vernon. So here we are some years ago. Here I am with the green is my wife here. My son is in the back. My daughter, Fatima, but Ileana's not here. And my granddaughter, she's 19 now, so you know, and he was 21 yesterday. So I dedicated this cabin. This is the slave cabin reproduction. If any of you have seen it down by the wharf. There were no slave cabins left there because of wood, but they reproduced one from Union Farm. They built it because they had the pictures of the plants. And I dedicated, not this day, but I dedicated that down at Mount Vernon. some years ago. Lions Bound Together, I talked about that already, you saw it there. That exhibit, as I told you, there for about 4 years. And the focus, we have an organization called the League of the Descendants of the Mount Vernon Enslaved. And the purpose of it, recognizing George Washington, the great man that he was, we want people to know that the founders of our nation also included the men and women who were unsung, and the children too, unsung, unserved. As I mentioned about planting the crops, harvesting the crops, built the joint, if you will. And when they expanded, built that too. So we want people to know about that. So we created the League of the Descendants of the Mount Vernon Enslaved to tell that story. And next year on September 20th, a year from this week, we will have the first national pulling together of that organization. Monticello has one, League. James Madison at Montpelier has one. Whitney in Louisiana has one. Middleton in Charleston, South Carolina has one of these organizations to help people understand that our ancestors too were the founders of this nation. And while we're talking about it, don't forget Martin, Washington, Dolly, Madison, Deborah, Franklin. So we're not talking about them, but it's a realization and recognition that each of these women kept the home fires burning while the guys were off at Trenton, Saratoga, or serving in France or wherever they were serving on behalf of our nation. Okay, so there, you've seen that one already. All right, this lady here, Gladys Quander Tansel, may she rest in peace, cousin, the first African-American interpreter died in Mount Vernon. She started there, the family legacy, of course, of servitude, involuntary, and then voluntary servitude. She passed away, but she was the first interpreter guy of African extraction. And she was there for 35 years, 25 as a guide, and 10 in domestic service. Can you imagine that? She started out as a maid, they called her in one day and said, "You like a job?" She said, "Yes, it is a job." So she was there 35 years. And here we are. This is an example of African American Black History Month. That guy in the middle. And we were just assembled there for an event because our legacy, of course, is broader than Loudon County. So that was just one of the examples of that. Okay. Now let's talk about some of the properties. This is a particular property. This house is still standing. It may not look like much. It's on the historic places of Georgia County. This is a family home built by my great-great-grandfather, Gabriel Quander. He worked for the Lord of Mercy Continental Navy. But they wanted him to go in service all the time, so they gave him a little piece of land on their property at the side of it. And so this house was built and occupied from 1875. It's still there. And it is placed because the family's legacy of so many organizations, religious and community service. Beneficial societies were founded. They have heard of those. After slavery, we had no Social Security, we had no retirement. Got to take care of ourselves, got to lift ourselves up, take somebody with us. So one of the beneficial societies, the name will come to you. The St. Mary's Beneficial Society Colored, yes. Yeah, they were there, Knights of Columbus, Knights of St. John, Margrett, founded in that house in Upper Marlboro, Maryland. And the house is still there. It doesn't look like much. It's about to fall down, but it's on the register of the historic place in Prince George's County. And the Maryland Quanders, historically, I mentioned earlier, maybe I did, that Henry Adams had recited Catholicism in his will of 1684. So we don't know if the Maryland Quanders' history of Catholicism goes back to 1684, but at least by 1800, it is there. So this particular church, St. Mary of the Assumption Roman Catholic Church on Main Street, this is the quote new church, because the other one burned down. This is 1898. And when they built and dedicated the church in 1898 in Prince George's County, you can imagine, y'all can tell you, it was very rigid segregation. So this here is the colored entrance. So if you were colored, you went in that door. And if you were white, you went in this door. So the colored entrance took you up into the back of the church where you had to sit in the back, behind the chains. Okay. And then after the white people had had their communion, they were under the chains. Reminder, we're not talking about velvet cords now, okay? So this is the way it was, okay? So this is the church representing the fact that the Maryland Quanders historically have a strong history in Catholicism. And there it is right there, St. Mary's Beneficial Society window. That window is that window there from that side, okay? It doesn't say colored here, but it says so in the papers. Okay. And when the church burned down, self-help, this building here, when the beneficial was being formed by the black members of the church and the restriction of access to certain facilities in the church, well, let's get our own building together. It's kind of updated, but that's the original building. So the beneficial was meeting in there. 1892, it's on the register of historic places for Post Joseph County. It might be for Maryland too. When the church burned down, the white parishioners came and could tell between the legs, can we borrow your facilities to celebrate the mass? Yes. They didn't treat them like they treated us. So this is now a law office across the street from the church. This is Main Street in Upper Marlboro. Oh yeah, there it is, a mark of Post Joseph County historic site. Now, in 1984, we celebrated 300 years documented presence of the Quando family. Man, here it is. And we were at Howard University. It was a grand affair covered by ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, BBC, did I say Radio France International? Okay, the German papers, the Swedish papers. We were in the Smithsonian 3 times. Not at the moment, give somebody else a chance. So there we were at Howard University. And I said 1684, 1984, but we have since gone back to that decade. Vice President George Bush was supposed to attend. Something came up at the last minute. He was up. This was an article that appeared in Ebony magazine. We have never said the oldest black family. We always say one of. Because there are others, and we want to respect that. And that was my late father, may he rest in peace, and my dear cousin, yes, long glory. Smithsonian National Museum of American History. After the Revolution, Everyday Life in America, 1780 to 1800. We expected to be there for about 2 or 3 years. We were there for 17 years. Okay. Wow. 17 years, featuring the Quander family. Yes. Now, our family ancestrally is from Ghana, West Africa. It's a Fanti name, Quando. And we have been there, they have been here. There's an exhibit that the Smithsonian has in the Cape Coast Castle, Elmina. Well, we came through Elmina Castle, down the road from Cape Coast Castle. But the exhibit is at Cape Coast Castle, because that's where the museum is. Right there, a couple of miles apart, you can see them from each other. And I am there with some of the Quandos. And those are some T-shirts that we had left that we took over there. We're glad to have it. And Gladys and Kofi, they were just here recently. And we were with the base in Frederick, Maryland. They got together 3 times. There I am there in the ancestral village of Konkaboom, West Africa, up in the hills. If anybody knows what Konkaboom, anybody know what Konkaboom is? Nobody didn't say it. Okay. And there's another same picture, that's from the Philadelphia Daily News. Grace's Ruth, yes. And we're getting close to the end, but we're not there fully. So I am a retired senior administrative law judge for the District of Columbia. This is all me, but that's the portrait up there. You see it on the back of the book. And one of my fraternity symbols, friendship is essential to the soul, the lamp of knowledge. Okay. As an author, my father was born as a juvenile, well, I can't say he was born, but was declared early in life as a diabetic, what we call a juvenile diabetic today. They didn't necessarily call it that then. And the doctor said he would not live to be 10 years of age. He had a breakdown when he was 3, wasn't diagnosed, another one at 5. And they decided at that time that he was a diabetic. And they told my grandparents, who incidentally had lost a child through tuberculosis a month before, that he wasn't going to live to be 10. But what we didn't know, and they didn't know, that insulin came on the market. And he was literally rescued. 79 years, he lived to be 86, 79 years on insulin. And when he died, the Jocelyn Institute, which is credited with the primary and perfection of insulin out of Canada, a research at Harvard, recognized him posthumously as the longest living diabetic, for which they had records dependent on insulin. Not the oldest diabetic, but the longest living depending upon insulin, 79 years, insulin 4 times a day. And this said he couldn't have children 4 times. He was a Catholic deacon, Roman Catholic Church. And there he is getting ready to do an invocation at Darrow School here in Virginia, where one of my daughters graduated. He was just sitting there waiting. I don't know where the picture, the photo was taken, whether about to do the invocation or just finished. But he was a Catholic deacon, served for 34 years, actually assisted Pope Paul VI in a mass in Rome for the canonization of St. Louis Cathedral. And it was not the canonization mass, but just 2 on the altar, the Pope and my father. Now, this lady, Nellie Quander, I have an author, that's the second book, Nellie Quander, Alpha Kappa Alpha Pearl. She was the first national president of the Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. The sorority was founded in Howard in 1908. She went to Howard in 1910. And in 1910, she became a member of the sorority, became the president of the chapter, only chapter in 1911. Then they had an internal breakup in 1912, where some of the ladies decided to want to join another, create another organization, Delta Sigma Theta. And she had just graduated in June. She came back in October and reassumed the presidency. And today, do we have any members of Alpha Kappa Alpha here in the audience? Do we have any members of Delta Sigma Theta? We have a soror, okay. Do we have any members of Zeta Phi Beta, another great organization? Do we have any other members of Sigma Gamma Rho? Okay, well, I know we have Omega Psi Phi, but while I'm at it, do we have any other Divine Nine fraternity members here?
Kappa Alpha Psi.
I think we've heard of Kappa Alpha Psi. Kappa Alpha Psi, they are our stepbrothers, because we both founded in 1911.
My daughter's AKA.
And your daughter's AKA, Nellie Quander, of course, Alpha Kappa Alpha, so your daughter's AKA. So there she is. And of course, Madam Vice President is a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha, if you hear that by now. Okay. And being an Omega and a legacy of the fraternity in 1931, through my uncle, they decided chapter of West Virginia State, and then my father too later. I wrote my memoirs of 50 years as a member of the fraternity. I'm now 60 years in the fraternity. 50 years, 50 plus Omega inspired years, tracing Omega legacy in 1931. And here I am in my sweater. And that's what's left. But I'm proud of the fact that I can, if I hold my breath, I can still do it. Real tight. Okay. All right. And I mentioned about the Catholicism of the Quanders on the Maryland side. Now, the Quanders on the Virginia side are largely, but not exclusively, Baptist. And it has a lot to do with Maryland being a Catholic colony initially, and Virginia being a Baptist Protestant colony initially. So here's Alpha Street Baptist Church, yes, where Quanders have been associated, church congregations 1803, not under that name. But the Quanders have been associated with it since about 1813. Yeah. And cousin Gladys Quander Tansel that we saw, she had a long history there. She was buried from there. Several others are buried from there. Now, we have a long history of Quanders in military service. So this is an exhibit I made for one of the Quander family reunions. We are the only Black family in the United States, maybe the only family, period. You don't know that. 4 generals. 4. And 3 of the 4 went to West Point. And of those 3, 2 of them were first captain. I don't know if you know what that means, but first captain is the same as president student captain. 2 of them. And the 3rd one was commandant. And commandant is the number 2 man at West Point. So we were traveling again in high cotton there. And of course you can't hear this gentleman here. John Pearson Quander, that's Nellie Quander's father, Civil War veteran. Yes. And we have 3 Tuskegee Airmen, 2 actually, because the 3rd was on my mother's side. This is Charles Johnson Quander, Tuskegee Airman, and he flew bombers protecting the troops. And so we're very proud of that. And there is John Pearson Quander. And when we had the Grand Army of the Republic here in 1915 for the 50th anniversary, this is Nellie Quander's father. He was a keynote speaker trying to get what we know now today is the African American History Culture Museum started. So I can't give him the credit. I'll say he was in the audience and he did speak. So presumably he spoke to that subject. And the gentleman on the right is Charles Johnson Quando, Trustee Airman is B25.
Wow.
Okay, these are the gentlemen. See the tall guy in the middle? Yeah. This is Leo Brooks, the father. He's 91 years old. And this is Leo Brooks on the left. He was the commandant, and that makes him number 2 at West Point in 2002 or 3, I think. This is his brother, Vincent Keith Brooks. You saw him all the time, every day during Desert Storm as Colonel Brooks, retired now as a 4-star. And he was the also first captain, excuse me, commandant, which is number 2 man at West Point. First captain, president, student council, commandant, the most recent one, this left there last year, reassigned, because it changed it in 2 years. And that's General Mark Quander. And the real tall guy in the middle, that's yours truly. Okay, well, we're wrapping this up. And this is the latest book, The Quanders of 1684, Enduring African American Legacy. Cousin Gladys and I were standing in the Oval Office with President Clinton and Governor Senator Robb. And this just gives a quick overview of who we are, what we are, what it's all about. So it's been my pleasure to be with you. And I know you may have some questions. And I'm also will be, if you're interested, in signing books. And for the brothers, I brought the photo from the 1924 conclave taken at the White House. And I do have some available if they're interested. Questions? Comments? I didn't mention this. You all know it already. But just have a brand new courthouse, not a brand new courthouse, a brand new name.
Right.
Charles Hamilton Houston.
Right.
Presumably you know who he was.
Oh, yeah.
All right, Charlie Houston and I grew up together, not him, the son. I went to his son's funeral some years ago. If ever there's a person who is deserving of that recognition, it is he.
Amen.
The man who slayed Jim Crow. There's no question about it. If ever anybody died too soon, who's to say somebody died too soon? The time comes when it comes. But he died too soon because he was laying, the plans for what became Brown versus the Board of Education. Right after World War II, President Truman integrated the military and executive order 9811, which I was the keynote speaker for that at Fort Belvoir, where I physically removed the name from Robert E. Lee from the street, pulled the curtain off of EO, executive order, that integrated military. And we're talking about laying the foundation. So they started laying that foundation. They were looking for the right case. I say they, I mean Charles Hamilton Houston, Thurgood Marshall, all over here, Spotswood Robinson, and James Neighbor, and others. Looking for the right case, the right time, the right place. And the Farmville, Virginia case was one of them. And of course, the DC case, the Delaware case, the South Carolina case. But we want to put a case that's not too far in the deep South also. And that was Topeka, Kansas. Charles Hamilton Houston was laying that groundwork. When I asked Charlie, talking about his dad, I said, what did your father do? He said, my mother said my father literally worked himself to the end. And by Thurgood, picked it up and kept on and made it happen. So it's nobody, no one person, it's the effort of many. And Charles Hamilton Houston is the framework, the dean at Howard University School of Law, which I graduated from, NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and all these other things that he's done. I'm reading Genius for Justice right now. And when I was told about the name and rename of the courthouse, I can't think of anybody who more deserves it. Absolutely. Any questions, comments? Yes. Mark.
Brother Quander, Joe Smith. I'm a graduate of the United States Naval Academy.
Oh,
right outside of Gate 3 is a memorial to Alice Haley. And I noticed in one of your pictures, it talked about the Quander family actually having linkages beyond what Dr. Haley was able to to discover. Did you ever have a chance to discuss the work that both of you did in tracing your roots?
The answer is yes, casually. I didn't know he was going back, but he did. I did go to Alice Haley's funeral, and he did know and recognize the Quander family, but he was talking of the difference in his story. That word didn't exist before, called faction. Because Hollywood got, I say Hollywood, television, got involved, and they created a total narrative based on a few facts. So that's how that story emerged. But our story is based on actual facts, but there's no screenplay to go with it. So I'm not saying it could never happen, but at my age and interest, I'm not focused on that. I'm focused on the book itself. So we never talked about it a great deal. And George Haley, his brother and nephew, too, we talked to him casually, yes. Yeah, that's the answer to that question. Any other questions? Yes, in the back.
James Taylor, I'm also kind of being a historian myself.
Yes.
So in your kind of journey in examining Rohulamin family's history, what have you found to be kind of sort of like the best sources and most helpful in your experience of kind of going through and trying to discover your family's history?
The most helpful? Well, I would say this. Much of this research was done before all of the modern devices that we have. This is a blood, sweat, and tears. And the time was spent in the Fairfax County Courthouse archives, blowing aside the dust. And similarly, down the railroad in Annapolis, getting to find out the history of the family, talking to some of the older members, talking about, well, we heard something other back there, this, that, and the other happened. And some of that research in those dusty carols could confirm some of it, could dispel some of it, or could clarify some of it. So I went to my first Quando family reunion focus in 1968, and it was on Quando Road at the Quando Road School. And I met a whole lot of Quanders I never knew before because I had not gone to any reunions. And I found out as I was in law school about some of the things they were saying, and I took some of my skills that I was learning on researching and cross-referencing and used that to get started. Some of this was done out in Utah, but not much, because I had more information at my fingertips here in Virginia and in DC, and this was built upon that. And then as the train started leaving the station, more people came forward, like the 4 Quander streets. There were 2 of them didn't exist yet, and then Quander Road was already there. And then I discovered that the Quander Street is southeast, but because of World War II went away, now we're talking about bringing it back. So there are all sorts of things in research about looking into the history of Quander Street. We find out about Quanders that went up from Mount Vernon and settled on Quander Street. And these types of things, incremental to build step at a time, has been a resource. And our information, our papers are stored 2 places, between Howard University Moreland Springfield Research Center and the District of Columbia History Center. Those 2 places, put the papers, as many as you can, in the same place, or 2 places, so that the whole history of the family can be found most easily rather than scattered in 25 or 30 different places. And right now I'm working in Fort Belvoir because we're looking at Charles Young's village, Charles Young, and the Quander family and others, the Jaspers, the Hollands, and some other families, were moved out of that area due to eminent domain when they expanded Camp Crockery and made it into Fort Belvoir. So that's a lot of history that's coming up about who was there and how they were there. The cemetery is still there, the deceased is still there, but these people had lives. Some of them coming out of slavery, left memoirs, or there's a little bit of this, a little bit of that. So it's blood, sweat, and tears type of thing. Everything is not at fingertips.
Thank you.
Thank you. You had a question?
Mine was very similar to
Oh, okay.
Just
Did you have a question?
Yes, so I wanted to know, how did you make that contact to get you to Ghana?
Well, very interesting. I'm about 17, and there are a lot of students at Howard, and they were in different countries. And I was with the international students, like just the organization, and talking to people, and 2 or 3 times, Mr. Quando. I didn't think anything of him. I didn't know. But after about the 3rd time, I said something. caught myself correcting somebody. He said, "Oh, well, you don't know the history of your name." And he was right. So I talked to one of my older cousins, and she said, "Well, you know, I heard that back there somewhere, it used to be Quando, but we take a census check to change it." Very casual. She didn't know either, but that was a light bulb went on. And then in talking to students, they said, "That's an uncommon name." And then in talking further, they said, "Well, you spell it with Q, we spell it with a KW, Quand." And so that led to further inquiry, and we learned more that the name Quando, Quander, Quando, all Fanti from Ghana, West Africa, and their history of the Fanti people and how they migrated across Africa from the Abyssinian highlands all the way until they couldn't go any further because they got to the water. Starting in about the year 900, and just gradually migrated all the way across. And so that's where we became. So the Amaquandos over there and we here, we have not done any DNA tests. We're satisfied that we have the right family group, not necessarily the right individual, although we do have some candidates as possible individuals because of the slave. Any other questions? Oh, yes.
Brother Quander, you talked about high cotton,
Yeah.
you also talked about Charles Hamilton Houston. Could you talk a little bit about them, Charles Hamilton coming out of M Street School and a lot of rich African Americans that might have come from Howard? Did you give me information about those types of folks?
Well, the M Street School, I don't know if you know the history about it quickly. 1851, the Matilda Minor, who you can never know of, a white woman from upstate New York, came down to Mississippi, right down to Mississippi, to teach colored girls. Religion, not religion. Education was separated by race and gender. So she was teaching free colored girls, not many. The whites didn't like it. And they said, if you're not on the last train tonight, you'll be hanging from the first tree tomorrow. You didn't know all of that. All right, so that's the background story. So she fled to Washington, 1851, founded the first structure, there were other little schools around, the first structured program that became the DC public school system for color. So as she progressed, first elementary school, you go a little further, there weren't many free blacks, but there were some. So this is 1851. So as it migrated, we got to do something for secondary education. 1871, they founded the preparatory high school for colored youth, 15th Street Presbyterian Church. And that, they got a building eventually, and on M Street, New Jersey and New York, they got a building. Washington Post made it possible. And they built the M Street School. That building is still there, except it's now a community service center. So the M Street School. So in 1916, they got more facilities and more money, and they built another building and put the name Paul Lawrence Dunbar on that school. So that's the history of that. Now, Charles Hamilton Houston, born in 1895, died in 1950. He was 53, didn't get his 54th birthday. He was 1896. Didn't get his 54th birthday. He was a proud graduate of the M Street School. And the M Street School, without question, was the most prestigious, in fact, it was the first all academic high school for blacks in the United States. And the number of people who graduated from there is long list, including my father's. Class of 1936. And in my father's class was Eddie Brooke, first African American to serve the United States Senate. And my cousin, Dr. Joseph Quander, 90 years old, just saw him yesterday. He graduated salutatory. Yes, what's that? Salutatory in 1951, and Yale came calling, and Harvard came calling. And so he went to Yale and ended up being the first African American medical faculty at the University of Texas, Austin. In gynecology of all things. And so a lot of question about him being a gynecologist for white ladies in the South. That seems a little awkward, but that's good. And so the school, M Street School, is so absolutely famous / Dunbar, if you know about it. And I was so honored, you don't know this one, I'm getting ready to tell you. Got a telephone call, let's see, this is September. Got a telephone call about December. And the M Street Foundation, because they have a foundation that to perpetuate the intellectual contributions to the history of the village, was having a poster project. And they were picking 6 people for the first project who were famous from connected to M Street School. And they picked 6 people contemporary to put pairing with them. And one of those 6 people was someone who taught them as a dean, that was Carter Woodson, was a father of Black history. And they honored me with him on the poster, just the 2 of us. I was so honored and surprised, yes. So they put me on that poster with him. It's certainly all throughout the DC Public School. And they plan to do it every year, but this was the first set. Annie Helen Burroughs was one. Anna Julia Cooper was another. I forget what something, the name of the player, right now, somebody might help me. Nobody can tell me who Anna Julia Cooper was. She was the first one.
Educator.
She was an educator, she lived me 107, and they paired her with somebody. But I can't remember whether Charles Hamilton Houston was one of the 6. I think he was, I honestly do. I have all 6 of the posters at home, and here I'm blanking on. But indeed, it was quite an honor. So that's the history of M Street School. And the number of people who came through there, Benjamin Davis, who was the first recognized, even though General Charles Young did get his star posthumously. That's our friend, brother. Benjamin Davis was the first recognized general African American. He graduated from M Street School because they wouldn't give Charles Young a star because of racism. But posthumously, Congress gave it to him a couple of years ago. So he is now, got to put a footnote on somebody. Any other question? I'll be here available to sign books. And yes.
So I have 2 more questions.
Yes, sir.
That way I'll get them all out of the way. So one is, has the family calculated how many generations from 1684 that are alive today? And then the second question is, what was your involvement in the slave memorial at Mount Vernon?
Okay. As far as generations are concerned, it's hard to say that because generations, some people say every 20 years is a generation. So if you're counting from, say, 1684, we're up to about 15 generations. But some people had children at age 40, some people had children at age 12. So it's hard to count the exact number. Now, as far as the slave memorial at Mount Vernon is concerned, I had nothing to do with the starting of it, but David, let me back up. If you remember, the Washington Post did an article, Dorothy Grant, in 1981, I think, about the fact that the slave enslaved at Mount Vernon had just been ignored because the Mount Vernon Ladies Association were pretending that they didn't exist. And that brought up that in the 80s, maybe about the 70s, when you went to Mount Vernon, you would see the sign servant quarters. And my father and others were very upset about that. Said these people weren't servants. These people were enslaved. And they weren't enslaved, that means against their will. We use the term slaves. We had a letter writing campaign. I remember that. The Mount Vernon ladies were very uncomfortable. So eventually they decided that they would take the word servant down to put slave. Now we have moved again, take the word slave down to put enslaved. So when the memorial was dedicated in 1981, I guess, the Mount Vernon ladies, the Black Women United for Action paired together. I'm an inactive, unfinancial member of the Black Women United. You don't have to be a woman. You just have to pay your money. And they did not come in with an annual event like they have now. But in 1990, I guess they started because after the Mount Vernon ladies allowed that monument that Francis Bolton, who was one of the regents from the state of Ohio, we're not going to go through bureaucracy, send me a bill, she wrote a check, paid for it. So that memorial, you go there, she put that there. The ladies voted and she paid for it. But they didn't do anything to celebrate or recognize the enslaved. So the Black Women United for Action, right here in the state, they picked it up and they've had it every year, and they're going to October 5th, we're going to have the annual tribute to Mount Vernon ancestors. It's open to the public. You do not have to be a descendant, because most people are not. You just go there and it's 11 o'clock. They have a very nice affair. I don't know how it's going to be set up this year, but at the slave memorial, they're on the site. And some years they have a reception depending on how much money they have, but some years they don't. So it's this year coming up, October the 5th. So every year I go, I have spoken, I have done the occasion on more than one occasion. And I'm not speaking this year, so somebody, I don't know who it is, but I will be in the audience on that particular day. So yes, that's an annual event. And as we are getting ready for a lot of things doing, we're trying to get the burial, the league I talked about. Burial site doesn't have a name, we want to get a name. If you've been there lately, you know that there are no grave markers in there because the slaves couldn't read or write, we don't know who's buried where. So we're trying to have some type of recognition because we know through sound technology, somebody is under this spot or that spot. So we're talking about putting grave markers there, we don't know if that's gonna happen. The Mount Vernon ladies are very, very conservative and slow to anger. No, I won't say it's slow to anger, slow to change. And just yesterday, the league, we had a monthly meeting. We were talking about a number of things because of the fact that we're getting ready to have our recognition on September 20th, 2025, where we're asking descendants of various parts of the family to come here for a national meeting. And the Mount Vernon ladies are a little nervous about that too. My cousin Gladys, who was the first African-American guide, and the slave tours, they called them, started in 1995. They were very hesitant on having that. And they had words and narrative that was very strict about adhering to that. And people would say to Gladys, and she was quite outspoken, here's Gladys said, was George Washington a good slaveholder? Gladys said, I don't think good and slaveholder go in the same sentence. And then she would say, he was better than some and worse than others. Talk about a non-answer. Because they did not want anything to happen. People say, oh, they got rid of her because she said something they didn't want. But at the same time, she didn't want to say something that's going to cause her to get fired. So she was there for 35 years, and I won't call it a fine line. They recognized that she was outspoken. They also recognized she was not going to do them any intentional damage. Okay. And when it came time to have the Olympics in Atlanta, and the torch came through Mount Vernon on the way to Atlanta, they went to Gladys and say, would you like to carry the torch? Gladys said, no, I'll call on my cousin Rohulamin. They said, would you like to carry the torch? I said, no, let's shift it back to your granddaughter. And Alicia carried the torch. She was 18. She carried the torch when it came through. They had someone to represent, they had three. Someone to represent the Washington family, someone to represent the Peter Custis family, and someone to represent the enslaved. And Alicia represented the enslaved. They ran the torch through the property in Mount Vernon on the way to Atlanta. Okay. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I have one final question. Because the story you just told is very topical now. If we look around the country, the selective telling or untelling of history is becoming an epidemic. And you've been on sort of the front lines of doing that. What would be your recommendation for organizations like the library here and everywhere else so that we can do what you've demonstrated, which is to tell the entire history, but not do it in a way that makes people, I'm not sure what the word would be, so uncomfortable that they react negatively?
Well, I think number one, we have to keep pushing. And we also have to learn how to not push too hard. We have to tell people, first of all, we need open minds because there's so much of our history, American history, that we don't know. And so we must learn that story and be accepting of the fact that all history is not good and all history is not bad. And all of our forebears were not necessarily good people, no, they're necessarily bad people. So we have to keep an open mind, and part of the open mind is that places like where we are right now, libraries need to continue publishing things. Now, when you get into certain things about sex books and stuff like that, I can understand a parent being concerned that their third grader shouldn't be picking everything off the shelf. But at the same time, there are things like the color purple or anything else, that if bad things happened, that are part of life. And I think that a child can understand that is part of life. But by hiding it, you only make it worse. I wonder what's in that book I'm not supposed to see. And that is what gives rise to this handsome young man here, going where his family doesn't want him to go, because he's curious, it's only that. So I think we have to keep pushing. And we have to understand that the story of American history is not just what a white person did. And all of our Black ancestors were not kings and queens.
Right.
I think this is where we lead ourselves down the wrong path. When we talk about African American, well, I'm descended from the king of. No, you weren't. Just like not here, you probably weren't. So we need to understand that history, all of us, is his story, and because the white man wrote probably the most of the books, it was his story. But her story and our story, like it says in the forward, this book forward, written, it's American history, and the book is dedicated to George Floyd and Savannah. It's an American history written from an African American perspective to tell you what else was going on. And then what else was going on while George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, all those guys are doing whatever. Henry Quando and the generation were dying, they were working, they were suing people, they were winning, they were establishing a record, and they left so much for us to find. They didn't win a case, but any case, but the fact that they went up to court and stood up for their rights is an incentive to us, because they persevered. They tried to get some education. They were men, which is a responsibility. They had scholarship, they were trying to help their children. They persevered, and they uplifted somebody else. And that's called service. Okay. Yes.
I just wanted to follow up on your encouragement to learn the stories and tell the stories, and also want to say and invite everyone to come back to the Balch and look at the all the things that the Black History Committee, Friends of the Thomas Balch Library, has been doing for the past 24 years in order to tell the stories and do just as you said. There are so many people here who are from Loudoun, who are the historians and have done that work. So I just want to shout them out. I'm a transplant from DC. And
Did you go to high school there?
I went to high school.
Where?
I went to, let me get the name right, because it just changed.
Jackson Reed Wilson?
Jackson Reed Wilson, also Jackson Reed Wilson. But my mom, I wanted to say, went to Miners Teachers College.
The University of District Governor named after Martella Minor. Yes.
So, but yeah, I could talk about DC all the time. But just to encourage you to know and to come back and see some of the resources that have been not only collected by the BHC, but through the Balch.
Yeah, Jackson Reed was Woodrow Wilson High School, but it was part of the reassessment of things, places that were named for segregation in this. Woodrow Wilson, you may not know this, but he was from Virginia, you won't know that. He was an ardent segregationist. And they decided that he resegregated the DC government, in case you don't know. We were making a lot of progress in DC, still early 1900s, making a lot of progress. And when he came to town, he and his wife did not like the fact that they saw white and colored working together. And so they set out some type of process whereby they resegregated the government. A lot of the blacks lost their jobs or were demoted. So there was a decision that Woodrow Wilson High School to be renamed, and they renamed it Jackson Reed. Jackson was the first African American teacher at Woodrow Wilson, and Reed was a former superintendent of the DC public schools. So they named it Jackson Reed, took Woodrow Wilson's name off. Thank you very much. I will be here for those who are interested. And I'm gonna unhook myself now, but I don't wanna walk away and tell everything.
And I'm so
Doesn't help.